you will probably have absolutely no idea who I am, but I created the Support Hub directory. And I created it because when I was going through the process of access to work, I found it overwhelming, complete nightmare. There was no one place to find any information that was vaguely useful other than sending you around in circles and getting lots of people to message you on Facebook. And so I created a directory, and it was through all of that that I found that there are actually people who can help you with the access to work application process, answer questions, lots of knowledgeable, useful information that was calm and collected rather than bombarding you with lots of fear tactics and everything else. And so someone who I've had lovely pleasure to meet is Alice, who is from Sycamore Disability and Business, and she's an independent access to work advisor, disability consultant, and a workplace needs assessor. So this is absolutely perfect for our first lunch and learn. It means she's been able to put together a batch of slides which will just help with the what do you do once you have your award? What's your next step? How do you process it and make use of it? What are your options at that point? And so at this point, I will hand over to Alice.
Thanks, Lydia. A small child has just started shouting outside my window, so I'm not sure. Can you hear that? Shall I close the window?
Don't worry, that was a little brief moment. It was like a happy dance for saying hello.
Okay, so that's fine. We'll assume that you can't hear that. So hello everybody, I'm Alice Hastie. I'm here today to talk about what to do once you've got your award, because often people really stall at that point. It's going to be quite a brief overview, so there's obviously a lot more to it than we're going to be talking about today. So if you need any more support, that's fine. You can contact me at any time. So in terms of a little bit more about what I do, so as Lydia says, I provide independent access to work advice, and I do that for both claimants, support workers and employers. So if you want support from me, I can do advice sessions, so 60 minutes of advice, or I can do more prolonged support as well. So let's dive straight in. So today we're going to be talking about challenging decisions, a big one right now. We're going to be talking about putting that support in place, making claims, and renewing and changing your award. So that kind of administration as your award goes on. We're going to stop at the end of each section to have a little chat, see if there's any questions, which I think Lydia would say put them in the chat box. Lydia, is that right?
There's a little Q&A button you should be able to see. I've set up a starter post just saying welcome, add any questions.
Great. So yeah, if you put them in there, Lydia will feed them through to me when I take a pause. So do that. So challenging decisions. So I'm assuming that if you're here for this talk, you've got your kind of award letter in your hand that's come through the post, it's come through an email. You might have a report from a workplace needs assessment as well. So you've got that information, you know what you've been awarded, and now you're trying to work out what to do with it. And one of the key things that people are doing at the moment is obviously challenging decisions, because access to work are really cutting back on the funding that they're providing. So there's two key ways of challenging decisions. The main one is a reconsideration, which is where you ask somebody to take a look again at your the decision that's been made. And the other one is a complaint. So I'm just going to talk about these two in a little bit more detail. So reconsideration, what are they? How do you ask for one? And what should you say, importantly? So a reconsideration is fundamentally asking somebody to reconsider the decision that's been made. And this is done by a new case manager. So you will have spoken to an original case manager who's made the decision about what to award you. Let's say it's a support worker, and you think they haven't given you enough hours, or the hourly rate is too poor. You essentially request that a new case manager looks again at that decision and decides whether or not they think it should have been different. You have the opportunity to give them more information, to explain why you disagree with the decision. And this process can take anything between 3 and 6 months. There's quite a significant wait time. It's important to understand the difference between this and, say, PIP. So if you have been through the PIP process, you might think of a reconsideration as a mandatory reconsideration and part of a pathway towards a tribunal. And that's not the case with access to work. You don't really have a statutory right to this reconsideration, and there's no further appeal process beyond going to, I can't remember what it stands for, but the ICE, maybe Independent Commissioner's Office, something like that, executive. But really then you're talking about if you did that, it will be because of a procedural issue rather than necessarily a disagreement with the reconsideration. So you might be talking about you weren't treated fairly and the decision wasn't, they didn't consider the right information, but not so much actually just to this, you disagree with the decision they came to. So the reconsideration is really it. There's not another point after that. So a really important thing to know with the reconsideration is they do reconsider the whole decision. So in theory, if you're asking for a reconsideration, let's say you got given 10 hours of support work, you wanted 20, it's possible they would reconsider and give you 5. It's not a massive risk, but just being aware that, awards could go down as well as up. So how do you ask for one? There's 2 ways. You can do it by email, and you'll have an email address on the award letter that you've been given, or you can do it via phone to the helpline. Where possible, I would probably do it by email. It means that you can provide that extra information that they need. And you have 4 weeks, so it's really important to know there's a deadline, and that's 4 weeks from the date on your award letter to get that reconsideration request in via email or via the helpline. Okay, so what should you say? So I have some top tips. What you're trying to do when you're doing a reconsideration request, in my opinion, is you're trying to give them all the information and make it easy for them to make a decision in your favour. So avoid sending them one long paragraph email explaining all the ways you're upset and that you want it reconsidered. Instead, send them a well-structured professional email that clearly outlines exactly what you're challenging, what you want them to do instead, and your reasons for making that challenge. I would always assume they don't have access to emails that you sent your previous case manager. So if you're thinking, yeah, but I've explained all that bit to my previous one, you need to re-explain it again here because they may not see that. I would also reattach any important information such as support worker record or task form, quotes, anything at all that you think would be important. I would tend to encourage you to write impact statements, although I'm saying keep it professional, keep it structured, keep it factual. An impact statement is really where you could explain perhaps the physical, emotional impact of the process that you've been through with access to work, what the lack of support means to you, what it's going to mean for your employment going forwards. But ultimately, you want to give them a compelling case that they can easily understand and that kind of leads them to make the decision that you want to make them to make. Okay, so what's a complaint and how is it different? So you can make a complaint at any time. It doesn't need to be once an award's been made. So you can make a complaint when you're speaking to a case manager, before you speak to a case manager. You can make a complaint after your award's been accepted and you're using it. A complaint is about where you believe you've been treated unfairly. So again, it's not about disagreeing with the decision as such. It's perhaps that the process is taking longer than they said it would, or that your case manager isn't responding to your emails, or your case manager is being rude, or refuses to listen to your explanations of your disability. So it's not an escalation of I still disagree with this decision. It's more about the way that you're treated and any way that the process is treating you unfairly. Again, you want to be clear about what the complaint is and what you want to be resolved. So if your case manager is being rude, not responding to emails, and you need a different one, you need to explain that. So make it clear that the outcome that you want is for them to reassign you to a new case manager. Don't just leave them to come to that conclusion on their own. And you can submit a complaint either via email or via the helpline. Via the helpline, the benefit is that it's definitely there, it's logged, you know that it's done. But an email, again, you get to give that more contextual information. I would make sure that you provide them with all the information, again, in a well-structured, clear manner so they can see what has happened. So if let's say the case manager isn't responding, give that timeline. You say, this is the log of the emails that we've had. As you can see, I've been waiting 3 months to hear anything from them, and we're in the middle of the point where they're meant to be awarding my thing. As I said, so I guess we're talking after you've got the award here. So a complaint would probably be more around the way that your case manager treated you and came to their decision. I'm just going to take a little pause there and see if there's any questions or if there's anything you'd like to ask Lydia about reconsiderations and complaints.
Hello, hi. Sorry, I am hoping this is all working okay. I've just had a couple of people mention a couple of questions. Let me just. So you should be able to ask any questions. If you can see any questions in the Q&A. If you can't see any questions, then please drop them on an email and I will spot that. But for some reason, the Q&A link is not being helpful. But if you raise a hand, I think you can raise a hand, we can potentially do a question, if anybody would like to. Otherwise, drop an email to hello@supporthubdirectory.com. Just go back. Teething problems on our first one. Apologies.
Yeah, it's the first one today, so this is the way tech is, isn't it? It's always going to be a challenge.
You gotta love your tech, or not. So, Gail, I think I have allowed your mic, and you did a raise hand if you have a question. No, that's always great, isn't it? I've been having messages, so at least that is working. So
okay, that's good.
So my immediate question was actually whether or not there was any. Is there any sort of a template form? Is there anything that you're suggesting to make sure that people remember all of those points you were saying about making sure there's a call to action, as in what's your request, what's your points? Because I think otherwise we get caught up in a story of what the problem is without actually saying. And I know that one of my people I dealt with was really exceptionally polite, calm, very friendly. And then I spoke to someone who felt like they hadn't eaten in 3 days, were proper hangry with me, and I couldn't speak without being shot down. So if there is any advice or even a list of what might help with people, it would be really useful.
Yeah, so I currently don't have one. You're right. It's about finding the time to sit down and do that. So no, I personally don't have a template. I'm not aware of a template floating around amongst the other people who support with access to work, although they may have their own ones if you contacted them individually. What I do is I can provide, like if somebody pays for an advice session, I can talk them through exactly what they should be putting in their reconsideration. But I also personally provide a reconsideration package. So somebody can obviously pay me to write the reconsideration email for them, and I'd make sure that was covered. But no, you're completely right. It'll be really helpful to do a blog or a template, but I personally have not found the time to do it.
No, that's fine.
And as I say, I'm not aware of one that I'm like, oh, but I'll point you to, so and so or this company.
And with access
I
to work,
suspect somebody
no
probably does have one somewhere, but not that I've seen.
Yeah, it is very difficult to cover all of the points.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, okay.
Obviously, they can come back and rewatch this lovely Lunch and Learn webinar and remember, go through what I just said.
Yep. Cool. Okay. Apologies for missing Q&A, but carry on.
Shall I continue on to the next stage? Yeah. So putting support in place. This is the bit where people fall down. Obviously, I need to direct you here to the Support Hub directory. Lydia has put a lot of work into making a fabulous directory where you can go and provide the service providers for the things that you've been funded for. So that makes that a lot easier than it was previously. Big question is always, where do I find a support worker? And there's other answers, but a Support Hub directory is fantastic for finding those. I'm just going to go through some basic concepts as well. So some important things to note in terms of putting support in place is that it is your responsibility. If you've got an award, this is now your responsibility. Access to Work does not provide support workers, coaching, equipment, software. You need to go and source that yourself, or your employer does. So if you're employed, you really need to be talking to them now to find out who's going to do that. Is it going to be you? Is it going to be your line manager? Is it going to be procurement or IT? Who's going to actually make that purchase and make the decision about which provider to go with. You do have a deadline, so you have 12 weeks from the point the date on your award letter to get support in place. It doesn't mean you need to necessarily be using it, but you need to have purchased the thing or got an agreement for your coaching or got an agreement for your support worker. There is a deadline. People sometimes get so overwhelmed with putting support in place that they don't get around to it for 6 months, and then they realise they've passed the deadline, which is obviously very stressful, and they have to go back to Access to Work and request an extension, which is possible, but it's better not to need that in the first place. A key principle that people often don't know is if you've got your they may or may not provide some suppliers in your award letter, but if you've got your workplace needs assessment report, then you'll probably have 3 suppliers for each expensive bit of equipment or coaching laws. And it's important to know you don't need to go with any of the suppliers that they mention. Suppliers are included for the purposes of the case manager making decisions about how much money to give you in funding. They're not there to say you need to go to coaching with Neurobox or Thriver or a specific place. So you can go with any supplier as long as they're providing the same thing and they can give you, the receipts. And also you can pay extra to upgrade. So if you've been given funding for an ergonomic chair and you need some extra features that kind of take you above the minimum needs that Access to Work was going to fund, then you can purchase the more expensive chair, but then you can only claim back what Access to Work said they would pay. If you're anxious about that, you could speak to the Access to Work payments team beforehand just to double check that that's going to be okay in your case, but the principle is definitely correct. So people always say, well, where do I start with this? The place to start is reading that letter. So you've been sent a letter, an award letter that explains what support you've been provided. So read through that thoroughly, make sure you understand what it is. And if you had a workplace needs assessment, I would recommend you ask for the report because that will give more context to what you've been awarded and why. And it will also give you the names of some suppliers that you could reach out to. And if you don't know what to do with that letter, you don't understand the support that's been provided, then seek some help. Phone the Access to Work helpline. They may be able to help you. You could email the original case manager. They may get back to you. They might just ignore your email because you're off their caseload. Or speak to somebody like me. There's other organisations on the Support Hub directory who do similar things. So there are people out there who can help you. You can also ask in online communities. And again, your peers may be able to give you support. So I'm going to go through the different types of things you might be awarded and just talk about some of the specifics of putting them in place. So support workers is a big one. Lots of people need support workers. There are a variety of different types, which I've listed here, from BSL interpreters through to job aides who can help you do your job, drivers and carers. People often worry that they're meant to use someone specific, and in general you don't. Although that there are some exceptions. So if you're funded for a BSL interpreter, then they have to be registered to be qualified. Again, a job coach, I expect them to qualify as a job coach. But if they're a job aide, a driver, a carer, there wouldn't be any specific requirements for that, and you can use family and friends. That's not a dodgy thing to do. They're often the best people able to be available and to support you. Support workers are always fully funded, so you or your employer are not going to have to pay any contribution to that. And they can be employed or self-employed. So if you're employed, the ideal would be that your support worker is employed by your organisation, and that conversation should have hopefully happened before your award was made, so you know exactly how that's going to work. Or they can be self-employed, so that would mean that they're contracted either to you as the client or to your employer, and they're paid in a different way, and the hourly rate would be higher. They don't normally provide travel expenses, so if you're self-employed and you have a self-employed support worker and they have to travel to come and see you, they can't claim back any mileage, anything like that. However, if you do travel with your support worker, let's say you go to a conference, then Access to Work may be able to provide you with reimbursement for things like the train fare for your support worker to get there, hotel, if you have to stay overnight, subsistence if they need to eat, which they will. But you need to agree that with Access to Work. You can't assume that they're going to pay that. You need to agree it in advance. So I think that's the important things to cover with support workers, but particularly if you're employed, you need to be talking with your employer, hopefully before this point, about how this is going to work, who's going to be employing the support worker, how the contract is going to be set up, if they need to come and see you in person, how they're going to access the site, and if they're going to support you with IT, how they're going to access the IT infrastructure. It's easier if you're self-employed because there'll be less constraints around that. So special equipment, and what do we mean by this? So this will be if you've been awarded any software, equipment, subscriptions, assistive technology. So you probably would have had a workplace needs assessment, but you might not if you knew exactly what you needed. Ideally, if you had an assessment, you'll have the report because it'll give you the details. The award letter might say something quite brief, like ergonomic keyboard, whereas the report might give you more of a description about which specific keyboard they had in mind and why, so that you can understand which one you should be getting. Again, you don't need to use the recommended supplier. It might say Back Care Solutions, Ergonomics Online, Thriver, Neurobox, Diversity. You don't have to use any of the ones they've listed. That was just for quoting purposes and putting the right number in place for the cost. And cost share may apply. So if you're employed, you really need to be talking to your employer about this, because they may have to contribute part of it. If they've got over 50 employees, then they're going to be contributing some level towards your equipment and software. So you need to be talking to them. Who's gonna buy this stuff? How are they going to make their contribution? How are they going to get money back? Is the money going to go directly to the procurement team, to the HR team, the finance team, the IT team? How's it working logistically? And this is going to be very unique to you and the organisation that you sit in, but obviously you can get a generic advice from me or from Access to Work. If you're self-employed, pro formas exist, and it's really important that you know this. So if you're a very small company or you're self-employed, then you can get something called a pro forma, which would be where the supplier, let's say Back Care Solutions, they provide you with an invoice for the ergonomic chair that you need. You submit that to Access to Work. Access to Work pays the supplier directly, which might take 3 months. And at that point, they send you the equipment. So you don't have to find the capital, which could be several £1,000s, to pay for this stuff up front, but it does mean you have to wait. Really top tip is that some of the big suppliers, so for ergonomics, that would be Back Care Solutions, for software, that might be iDiversity. If you give them a copy of your Access to Work award letter, they will go through it and work out which bits they can provide you with, so they can give you more of a, it's one invoice, one delivery, one supplier, as opposed to trying to get all the things from different places. So that can be really, really useful. And again, you can pay extra to get the more expensive version of whatever it is. Coaching and training. This is technically a support worker, but I've separated it out because I think it makes sense. So one of the things you need to understand is what you've been awarded. There's lots of different types of coaching and training. You might have been given workplace strategy coaching. You might have been given workplace strategy training. You might have been given ADHD coaching. So again, if you can reference your workplace needs assessment report to really understand what it was they were aiming for, that can help you work out where to get the support. What's the difference between workplace strategy coaching and training? Well, it's pretty subtle, and probably you would be best off going to a provider who understands that difference. But again, you can use any coach. So if they've used Neurobox or Thriver to quote, you can find an independent coach, as long as they're prepared to take the funding, so work to the rate, or you can pay the extra if their rate is higher. Although they do need to be a coach. So sometimes they're like, oh, well, I've got a therapist. Can I use it to pay for my therapy? And the answer is no. If you've been given funding for ADHD coaching, that's not therapy. And you need to find somebody who is qualified and advertising ADHD coaching. So it is fully funded. So you or your employer shouldn't have to contribute to this. I would really recommend, if you're looking for a coach particularly, that you do chemistry calls, to go through something like the Support Hub directory, book in a short 20-minute, 30-minute call, and get to grips with what that coach's approach is, what their personality is. Do you think they're the right coach for you? Because coaching is how effective it will depend on the relationship that you have with them. So I'm not going to go into these in too much detail, but just important to note that there are these other support streams, which is travel to work, travel in work, and some adaptations to vehicles and premises. And these are particularly the adaptations, these are much more bespoke. So in terms of implementing adaptations, you should really be talking to Access to Work and your employer, and you'll need some specialist quotes and stuff for implementing that. So I'm not going to go into that here because you can't really give any generic advice. Travel to work and in work is likely to be taxi, so you'd be approaching a taxi firm, keeping your receipts, and that's fine. So I'm going to stop here and see if there's any questions, Lydia. Anything you'd like to ask? Anything anybody in the audience has asked?
We haven't had anything other than you have answered the questions I did have, so that's fine. The question I had is, and it's something which may be an entire other session of its own. When you get your grant and you're bringing someone in to help you, you may never have worked with someone in this way before. Do you need to have like contracts set up, or how would it work if you then have to go into the workplace and your employer now has this extra extra tag along person.
Yeah.
How does that work, or how should it
Yeah,
work?
as you say, it's a whole topic in itself. So it can be really complicated on a number of different levels. So as you say, so contractually, if you or your employer is employing them, then that would obviously be an employment contract. Hopefully your employer would be doing that. And they would know how to employ someone because they're employing you. So they should have a process that does that employment. But it is complicated. If your employer agrees to employ them, that's great. But you need to be talking to your employer about how much say are you going to be having in the decision making, like the recruitment process. Are they going to recruit someone you choose? Are they going to hold interviews and not involve you in that process at all, and then you're lumbered as a support worker that you don't know and you haven't chosen? Hopefully not that one, but it's a conversation that you need to be having. If they refuse to employ them, or you don't want them to employ them, then they're going to be self-employed, or you have to employ them yourself. So, you know, becoming an employer yourself is quite a significant responsibility. Hopefully you wouldn't be pushed into that situation, but it has happened. So yes, you then need to really be seeking advice on what your legal responsibilities are as an employer. But hopefully you would self-employ, which is a bit easier. So you find a self-employed support worker. There'll be lots of them on the support hub directory, or you find an agency who can work with the fee that Access to Work have given you, and you would have to set up a contract. But again, if your support worker is experienced, they would have a contract. They would have a contract ready, you would use their contract. It gets a little bit more complicated if you are using, say, somebody who isn't really a professional self-employed person. So let's say it's your partner or your mother, and they're maybe generally your carer, or they're available and they know your needs and they're going to be your support worker. Well, they need to register as being self-employed. It has to be done properly. So they need to contact HMRC, and you would need to find a contract, but you should be able to get something as a template online. But yeah, ideally you'd have a contract. I mean, technically a verbal contract is a thing, but they will need to invoice you, and you will need to submit those invoices to Access to Work. So there will be to some level of formality about it. But it's really difficult. And even then, on a practical level, if you're not used to working with a support worker, you might not know how to work with them day to day. What does that mean? How does that relationship work? What should they be doing? What should they not be doing? And that can be complicated. And I would just say, expect it to take time. If you've never worked with a support worker before and they're not someone known to you, don't expect them to be able to come in week one and be supporting you 100%. That relationship's going to take time to build. They're going to need to start to understand who you are, the problems you have. And again, this will be easier if they're a professional, because they will support you to navigate that relationship building and the building of the tasks that they're doing. But if they're not a professional, you're going to be working it out together. But yes, the answer is it's difficult. Just expect it to be a bit difficult, and it's going to be extremely individual to you and your circumstances and who the support worker is that you're bringing on, and whether or not you're employed or self-employed. But talk to other people about it, get advice, you know, go on the online forums, speak to somebody like me, speak to other people who've been in similar circumstances. If you're talking to an agency, then the head of the agency should have ideas on how to support that relationship building. So yeah, unfortunately, it's too specific, contextually specific, to give good advice, but it is challenging.
Yeah, and that
actually, a top tip that I do have is that if you're finding this difficult, you can get a temporary support worker. So those professional support workers who know what they're doing, you could take on somebody for, say, 2 or 3 weeks to support you to recruit the right support worker, to understand what that role is, to understand what the contracts are that you need to set up. So don't think you need to find the support worker that you're going to have for 2 years in the first month. You can get somebody in who'll be more than happy to support you to get the right person in place, which sounds a little bit counterintuitive, but when people realize that, they're like, oh, I don't actually have to do that bit by myself. There are people who can do that with me.
So you could put that through as being your support worker invoice in those hours, but they're helping you to establish what that role is.
Yeah, and I would have no qualms about that. Like, it's not specifically obviously in your support worker record or task form, but I wouldn't anticipate that there'll be any problems with Access to Work should they come and scrutinise what you are doing. That seems entirely justified to me.
And that was where I became really unstuck. So my experience was the first person I had, I didn't really know enough about access to work and what it covered or how it could help me. And I also didn't really know what I needed.
Yeah.
So the first person, it was never going to work. It just, both
Yeah.
sides, it was never going to work. The second person never actually came back to us, never even started. And the third person has been with me for now a year-ish,
Yeah.
and is still putting up with me.
Yeah.
So
as I say, I would choose somebody who's already experienced in this. So these are the people who would be on a support hub directory, the people who are advertising themselves. They need to know about access to work. They need to know the boundaries of what they should and shouldn't be doing. And they need to understand how to find somebody. So I don't think it would be reasonable, for example, to get a recruitment specialist in. But if you get somebody who is used to being a support worker, working with if you're autistic, working with autistic people, or if you've got chronic health conditions, working with somebody who has chronic health conditions. So I'd expect them to be a specialist in that area, working generically as a support worker. But those are the kind of people that I would expect to find on the support hub directory. And they probably wouldn't have the capacity to take you on as your 10, 15, 20 hour a week support worker, but they do have the capacity to temporarily support you while you work out how to put that in place.
Yeah, and I think that comes back to the chemistry calls or the trial sessions, and understanding what those first questions are that you ask of each other. And if they don't ask immediately, kind of, what's your reason for the access to what let's get to grips with what is it, what's the gaps, what's the piece of the puzzle that needs a little bit of help with. And the other thing was about privacy and sort of how to delegate and share out what you've got, which obviously comes back to the contract and how you sort of introduce someone when you haven't got any experience of building a team, and suddenly now you've got a team member who is this other half of you, but not quite a clone. It's quite a strange position because it's not a bringing in a full employee, but it's not an immediate clone of yourself. So if you have any tips on how people can think about that process of where do they go to start setting them up, what do you do to that mindset of changing into how do you hand things over? That's a huge topic.
It is a very big topic. And I think it's gonna, if you've been funded coping strategies coaching, your coach might be able to help you with that, because it is more of a kind of long-term setting goals. How do we do this? They wouldn't be able to train you on it, but coaching would seem like a really good method there. Another thing, I mean, this is quite personal, it's really going to depend on what your conditions are and your needs, but spending time together, so working together. You know, you're probably not going to be funded for body doubling. In fact, I'm confident you wouldn't have been funded for body doubling. However, in that first couple of weeks, it's also not realistic. They're going to swoop in and pick up the tasks that you are funded for. So I think having a plan of working together, you know, planning your work, going through your tasks together, so they can start to see what it is that you're doing, and you can explain what challenges you're experiencing, so they can be like, oh, okay, I can help you with that. Either I do it for you, or we sit together and work out how to do it together, or I work out how to support you to do it yourself. But kind of that spending time, it's going to be very hard to just send over lists of tasks, and also going to depend on why you've got a support worker. If we're talking lists of tasks, that will be a job aid doing replacement, so that's quite specific. Not everybody's going to have that funding anyway. It might be enablement support, it might be carer support, it might be, you know, kind of, if you've got a record of task form, going through that record of task form would definitely be a very helpful place to start, because that's technically what you've got the funding for. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but yeah, it's a messy program. Just don't expect to have it all sorted within a week or two.
I think one of the things that it took me time to realize is it's okay to find someone different.
Yeah.
It's all right to switch out if it's not working.
It's
and
extremely
I think
personal, you know, it's very intimate, and ending your relationship with your support worker doesn't imply a failure on either side. It's about finding the right support worker, the right client, and the combination of that. And I think it can be very tempting to feel like you have to keep trying to make something to work, and there will be an element to which you can't just jump out at the first sign of it not being perfect, because it's a relationship and it's going to take work and communication. But also, you don't have to keep going month after month if the relationship's clearly not the supportive one that you needed, because they don't have the right skills or the right personality, or you need something from them that actually is quite specific and they're just not the right people for that.
I think that was something which, if I'd have known from the very beginning, I probably wouldn't have wasted the first 8 months of my pot.
Yeah.
That you don't have to get it right first time. It's not like you can't be expected to do this and know exactly what you're doing.
No,
So,
no. Particularly if you've never had one before.
yeah. Anyway,
Yeah.
okay.
Okay, shall I move on? Okay, so making claims. This is the really important part. Hopefully you've got all your stuff in place now. You've found a support worker. You've worked out what keyboard you need. You've worked out which bit of assistive software you've been funded for. You've bought it. The really important bit is that you get your money back. That's what Access to Work is for. So making claims are key. You have to make that purchase and get the money back, except in the circumstances of a pro forma, which I touched on briefly, but that's mainly for self-employed people. So there's a couple of different ways of making claims. We've got the online portal, and we've got paper forms. So when you were given your award, in your letter, there should be the instructions and the link to go to the online portal and sign up. And hopefully they will also have sent you some copies of the latest versions of the paper forms. They do change occasionally, so don't just go and get one off the internet. Try and get it from the case manager or phone the helpline and make sure you've got the latest version. Online portal doesn't work for everybody, which is frustrating. So there's some people who you have to register, you have to prove your identity. It's run by HMRC. You have to have specific types of evidence to provide your identity, and some people just don't have it. There might be reasons for that to do with citizenship, to do with changing of names and it not being reflected perhaps in the ID, or being inconsistent across your ID. But if you have problems with the online portal, unfortunately, it's really hard to problem solve, and you're probably going to be doing paper forms and paper claims. You can also choose to do paper forms. There might be other reasons why you do it. You might find it easier. You would also have to do it if you're making claims on behalf of somebody else. So if you have an advocate and they're going to make the claims for you, they can't do that on the portal, unfortunately. So they would have to do the paper forms. Paper forms aren't that big a deal. They take a little bit longer, and you just need to make sure you do sensible things like taking photos of them, so that if they go missing, you can reference what it was that you said was on the form to either recreate it or talk to Access to Work. But ultimately, they're not that different. Online is much more convenient for most people, but paper is fine. The online portal, it's worth noting, it's got multi-factor authentication. So once you've signed up, every time you sign in, you have to have a code sent to your phone, which does mean that the point is you shouldn't be getting other people to do it for you. But if your support worker is going to fill in that form for you, you're going to need to be available for an MFA code. And really, ideally, you would then either watch them fill it out or come in at the end, see what they've inputted and sign off the deck, because you are signing a declaration yourself. So if your support worker logs in and does it on your behalf, then you are signing a declaration to say that it's accurate, and you're not seeing what they're putting in. So ideally, you would come in for at least some of that process, that you would do it online together. They'd share a screen, even if they're the ones actually filling it out. My advice would always be make sure that you're involved in that process, because you are declaring that you've done it and that it's complete. So you'll need to make sure that for each thing that you've purchased or month of support you've had from your support worker, that you have the original receipts and invoices, because you're going to have to upload those. If you've got a support worker, you're going to have to fill out a timesheet. So that's just day and the number of hours of support you had that day. And they may ask for a signed timesheet from your support worker to corroborate that as well. So it's important that if you have a support worker, they are keeping a timesheet, and that they are providing you with an invoice that you can upload. Obviously, if your employer has employed them, then there wouldn't be an invoice. That would be a bit different, but they still have to provide a timesheet. And that's really it. Some people really struggle with the forms and the online portal. But actually, it's a relatively intuitive system. I don't find it particularly challenging in itself. But if you're somebody who struggles with forms and making sure that details are correct and understanding exactly what you need to do, then I would recommend that you get support. If you don't have a support worker, then obviously that will be support from a friend or a family member or somebody who's good at forms. and I just keep records of exactly what claims you've made and when. And unfortunately, timescales are currently long. So if you make a claim at the moment, we're looking at least 20 working days for those claims to be paid, and it can be longer. So just being aware of those long timescales. And again, if you have a self-employed support worker, you're going to have to work out who's going to take that cash flow hit. One of you's going to have to take it. So either you have to pay your support worker and then wait to be reimbursed, or they're paid directly by Access to Work, which is possible, which is great for you if you're self-employed and you don't have that cash flow, but then they're waiting. So they might have to be funding essentially 2 claims at once, which is it's a lot of money for them to be waiting to be paid. So they might have, what I mean is they might still be waiting for payment for one, and it's time for the next invoice. So they're behind by 2 payments. So that could be thousands of pounds. So that is something that if you're setting up a contract with a support worker, you need to discuss very explicitly how payment is going to work. Are you going to pay them? Is Access to Work going to pay them? What's an acceptable time for them to wait? Who can best manage that cash flow issue? And if neither of you can, then you can't set up as a support worker, because one of you has to be able to carry the financial load. That's it on making claims. That's really very brief. Claims are obviously a lot more complicated than that. Lydia, do you have any questions you'd like to put about claims specifically?
The most frustrating part of it all.
Oh yeah, if you have anything to say about it, because obviously you experience this. You're a self-employed or director of a limited company. I'm not quite sure. You have a support worker, so I imagine claims are an ongoing issue for you.
It's an ongoing issue, and it is incredibly frustrating. And seeing posts in groups of people saying they're having to pull away from it, it's absolutely gutting. What I will say is, from the portal point, you said about some people just can't get the portal to work. For the first 6-7 months, I could not get access to the portal at all. I tried DWP for so many times, and they kept saying, "Oh, we've reset it, we've done something." And then really randomly, we just tried it one evening after 6-7 months, and it just let me in. So I have absolutely no idea. It was like it was connecting to another personal tax account or something.
Yeah.
So all I would say is just don't give up on it completely, because those paper forms are even worse. So I would just say try and see if you can get the portal to work eventually. Keep persevering with the helpline, who I don't know if they did anything or not, but magically one day it started working. At least the portal does give you a visible track. You know that if you put something in the post box, you just don't know when it's going to arrive, and you've added 5 days to something which you could have sped up a tiny bit. So that was just what I was going to point out there.
Yeah, no, I mean, that sounds like Access to Work, completely bonkers and inconsistent.
Although actually I was going to say something which we've had the question before, and I'm not sure how able you're able how you're able to answer this. So and I'm not an accountant in any way, so I don't want to answer incorrectly. So if you are the person who is receiving the support worker and you're receiving that money into your bank account, do you have to declare it or pay tax? No, I'm asking that knowing some of the other.
So it is in the Access to Work staff guide. They say it's not taxable for the purposes of income tax. It doesn't count. So you wouldn't, if you're having somebody who has to fill in a self-assessment tax return, whether that's because your employer refused to employ them, so you're employed but you're having to do that yourself, and you have to fill in a tax return for some other reason, or you're self-employed or you're a director, it's not taxable. So it's not income in that sense. If you're self-employed and it comes into your business bank account, you're going to have to account, you probably need to account for it in some way. But as long as it's cancelled out by payments going out, you would just exclude all of that from your tax return. You could include it if you wanted, but it's just a bit weird. But you definitely, I would just exclude. I exclude mine. The only complexity would be if it comes into your business bank account and within one tax year, it isn't entirely balanced out by your expenses, you might want to talk to an accountant about whether or not you should declare it then, because technically you might have had a small benefit. I would probably still argue that you just exclude it all and that over time it balances out because they're very clear, it's not taxable. But it might be worth just talking to an accountant in that scenario. But obviously you just need to be very clear that if you're excluding the income, you also need to exclude the outcome, because you can't claim those expenses against your income tax if you're not including the income, because that would be extremely dodgy. So you need to exclude all of it. So I use free agent, and I set specific accounting categories for the grant income and the associated outgoings, so it was easy to identify them and exclude them from my accounts. That makes sense. Yeah.
Thank you.
But yeah, it definitely doesn't count. So for example, it doesn't count as, again, if you're self-employed or you're a business, it wouldn't count towards your turnover that took you towards VAT threshold, for example. It's all just excluded for those purposes. Okay, great. Yes, I'm sure we could whinge about claims forever. So I have a support worker Facebook group, and almost, 80-90% of the posts that are on there are just everybody going, what's happening with payments? Where are payments? What date are they on? Because the wait times are so distressing to the support workers. It's a real struggle for them. And yet, as you say, lots of them are starting to say, I'm just going to have to walk away from this because I can't carry that financial load. But I also understand my client can't pay me either. So there's just nothing to do about that. So you end up having support workers leaving the industry. Okay, so briefly, just really important to understand that once you have your award, that's not the end of it. You need to be aware of the kind of ongoing administration beyond the claims. So new applications, this could still apply to you. So if you need new items of equipment, software, or a completely different support element, let's say you applied on the basis of having software and equipment, but now you need a support worker, or now you need taxis, you're going to need to put a new application in 90% of the time. Sometimes you might manage to convince them at the point of your renewal that you need a new item, but I wouldn't count on that. The basic advice is new thing, new application, which is obviously frustrating because it puts you back into the extremely long wait times. But it is a thing. Changes of circumstances. So this is very specific to either your circumstances change that affect your current award. So, for example, this would be if you, I'm trying to think of a good example. If you've got a support worker and they increase their rates, then you would obviously have to put a change of circumstance in for an increased hourly rate, and that may or may not be successful. It's not guaranteed to be successful. If your support needs change, let's say you get a new health condition and now you need more hours of support, then again, this will be a change of circumstances. If your change of circumstances means that you need new types of support, they'll probably tell you need to make a new application, which is, as I said, frustrating. There's also a wait list for change of circumstances. So again, don't expect them to contact you within a week if you let them know that things have changed. But this is really for changes related to support that you're already getting rather than new types of support. So if you're getting taxis, a key change will be if you change your address. So if your taxi journey is now shorter or longer, that's a really important thing that you need to let them know. If you're getting a new job, that's not a change of circumstances, that's a new application, and you need to put that application in before you start your job. Otherwise, you're going to end up in the really long wait list times. So if you put an application in before you move jobs, so less than 4 weeks, then you're going to be fast-tracked, really fast-tracked. They'll contact you within weeks. If you wait until you're in post and then you're like, oh, I've changed my job, so you probably let access to work now, then your application will go into the normal wait list, which will be 8 to 12 months, which you don't want. You need to be aware of when your renewal date is. Check your award letter. You want to be applying for a renewal anything up to 12 weeks in advance of that renewal date. And again, don't wait for your renewal to be like, oh, my support needs to change. Can I actually have Dragon? Can I have a support worker? Because the likelihood is they won't consider that. Sometimes they will, so I'm supporting somebody at the moment to try and get them to do a reassessment at renewal. But that's because we've got a very strong case that their needs have changed substantially and that they will be really disadvantaged if they're made to put a new application in because they can't wait 12 months for to be reassessed for their support. But that's, it's a bit of a gamble. We don't know whether they're going to say yes. They may have to go ahead and do a new application anyway. So don't wait for your renewal thinking, oh, I can sort stuff out then. And finally, something to be really, really aware of. So particularly when they were handing out, and they are handing out quite low hourly rates for support workers. Some people are like, oh, I can get around that by, for example, doing my support worker can do less hours, so they'll effectively get more money. But you can be audited and that is fraud. So just being aware that you can't just do anything you want with your support. You can't be like, oh, I've been given support for a coach and actually I want therapy, or I've got a support worker and I need a gardener. You know, it needs to be the support that you have been funded for. You can be audited and you could be prosecuted, for example, if they decide that you've committed fraud, or, you know, less than that, but you could just lose the award if they decide you're using it inappropriately. So just be aware that you can be scrutinised. Your support worker can be scrutinised, and you want to make sure that you're doing things within what they funded you without panicking about it. I've said that to people and they start to panic and they're like, oh, they're doing this thing, this is okay. You don't actually get a list of what your support worker can and can't do. So you can't refer to a specific list. But you need to be thinking, is this what they awarded it for? If you know it's not, then you should rethink. That's my general thing. So a little bit more about change of circumstances. You can do it at the phone or email. I would probably, no, either way is fine. I tend to think email's better because you get to put in more information, supporting information, but they never reply to those emails. So I would recommend, if it's accessible to you, phoning up later and checking that they've logged it. Otherwise it might be 6 months and you don't even know whether or not they received the email. Change of circumstances can be backdated. So let's say, for example, you need your support worker hourly rate increased by £5 an hour. It could be backdated to the time you requested a change of circumstances so that they can make that change retrospectively, because you will have been paying that extra for 6 months at that point. And it's not guaranteed. It's really important to know that you can't just be like, oh, well, I need more hours or I need more money and I've put in a change of circumstances and that's going to be successful, so therefore I'm going to be repaid. You have to accept that it may not be successful and you may not be repaid for any of the extra costs. A renewal, just a little bit more information, do it for 12 weeks beforehand. Put something in your calendar now so you don't forget, or ask your support worker if you have one to prompt you at that point. You can do it online or by phone. It takes about 5 minutes. It's just contact information, really. So who you are, what your contact details are, and whether or not there's been any change, which can be a bit misleading, because if you say, I need more support, actually they probably aren't going to consider that. So just don't think that's the thing, just because it's on the form. And you'll probably need to provide new evidence. So if you've got a support worker, I would expect you to provide another support worker record of task form. If you're self-employed, I'd expect that you would need to provide updated accounts to show that you're still eligible, your business is financially viable. So just being prepared that you're probably going to have to provide more information at the point of your renewal. And also, again, being prepared, there's no automatic right for a renewal. So you might have a support worker or you might have software on a subscription. Don't think that just because a renewal exists that that's going to be renewed. Be prepared for your award ending or being cut. And just a note on coaching, sometimes people think coaching isn't normally renewed. So you might have been given 12 sessions of coaching to use over 12 months. That wouldn't normally be renewed for a second or third year. Coaching is really meant to be a one-time intervention. And that's that. So we've got